As part of Shared Health's video library series, welcome to this brief introduction to suicide and suicide prevention. We are glad you are here to explore some basic understandings about suicide, what it is, who and how it may impact folks, misunderstandings about suicide, some best practices as to what is helpful to do or say and what is not, as well as helpful strategies and resources. Before we begin, it's important to note that Shared Health provides health services in facilities located on the treaty territories and ancestral lands of the Inuit, Anishinabeg, Anishinaabe, Nahitawuk, Ininawak, Nehiawak, Dakota Oyate, and Denisoline nations, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. We acknowledge harms caused by colonialism and dedicate ourselves to building relationships and collaborating with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Through this commitment, and rooted in truth and reconciliation, we will improve health experiences and outcomes for Indigenous people. In this presentation, we will begin by defining suicide. We will go over some warning signs, explore who may be impacted by suicide in Canada, and discuss some of the myths about suicide. We will examine how best to speak with someone you may be worried about, provide some safe phrases one might use, as well as some safety strategies. We will examine the risk and protective factors for suicide, and we'll finish with a review of useful resources. Please do not worry if any terms seem unfamiliar to you, as this presentation aims to assist you to gain a general understanding about suicide and explore accessible resources. To define suicide, in reference to the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention, suicide is the act of taking one's own life voluntarily and intentionally to end their life on purpose. Although suicide is a difficult topic to broach, when someone expresses a desire to die or a decreased will to live, it is important to listen, to respond, to act, and to seek help promptly. If you wish to learn more about signs of suicide, communication skills, intervention strategies, or supports, please explore Safe Talk, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, Living Works Starts Online Suicide Prevention Training, and consider visiting Canadian Mental Health Association's program for preventing suicide at cmha.ca. While it is best not to attach any warning signs to a specific situation, such as a breakup, as it will depend on what an individual considers to be painful, unbearable, or traumatic, there are some potential indicators of suicide to consider. According to the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention, or CASP, suicidal warning signs may include talking or writing about wanting to die or to hurt or kill themselves or someone else, saying they feel hopeless, trapped, without purpose, in pain, or like they're a burden to others, looking for ways to harm themselves, for example, they may stock medicines or weapons, increasing their use of alcohol or drugs, withdrawing from family, friends, and activities, seeming angry, grumpy, anxious, or depressed, eating or sleeping less or more than usual, doing risky things like driving too fast, as well as giving away belongings. While it is important to know that suicide affects or impacts people of all ages and backgrounds, we must also note that there are ways to help, and that by taking the time to understand, we can work towards eliminating stigma and providing support when people need it most, especially when we consider these facts that 11 people die by suicide every day in Canada according to Statistics Canada. Health Canada reports that 11.8% of people in Canada have had thoughts of suicide at some point in their lives. For every person who dies by suicide, as many as 135 people can be impacted by the loss, as reported by the Centre for Suicide Prevention. We shall now look into dispelling some of the common myths about suicide that are out there. Suicide is caused by mental illness is a terribly common myth. The fact is that there is no single cause of suicide. Having a mental health problem can increase your risk of suicide. However, if someone dies by suicide, that doesn't mean that they had depression or another mental illness, as people sometimes assume. Many factors and circumstances can contribute to someone's thoughts of ending their life. Things like loss, addictions, trauma, depression, Serious physical illness and major life changes can cause some people to feel overwhelmed and unable to cope. It isn't necessarily the nature of the loss or stress that makes someone want to end their life. It's the feeling that these things are unbearable. Talking to someone about what you are going through can help ease that pain. If you are feeling like this, or you know someone who is, please reach out. The next most common myth is that it's dangerous to ask someone if they are considering suicide. Talking about suicide does not put the idea in someone's head or make someone become more suicidal. Asking someone if they have been thinking about suicide can open up the conversation and help them share their feelings. They may well be glad that you asked. Before we look into other myths, let's first explore some best communication strategies. As mentioned, talking about suicide with someone you are concerned about may not be easy or come naturally, but we can consider some helpful strategies for doing so. Some strategies for effective communication about suicide are to let them know you care. Let the person know they matter to you, and this is why you are starting the conversation. They may be struggling with feelings of hopelessness or isolation and feeling like they have no one to turn to. Ask them if they are thinking about suicide. If you think someone you know might be considering suicide, it's usually better to ask them directly. They might be trying to find a way to explain how they are feeling, but struggling with finding the words. By asking them, you open up the conversation, you give them an opportunity to speak. It can feel difficult, but by using the words suicide, die, kill yourself, you will ensure you understand what it is they are considering. Let them know you are listening. Give the person space to share their feelings. Let them know you won't judge them. Try to listen and really hear what they are saying. Often, it's not about trying to find solutions, but just being a listening ear. Acknowledge their pain. Feelings of isolation and sadness can reduce when someone feels they have someone to confide in. People who are at risk of suicide are usually in pain. You might not be able to make this go away, but the small step of acknowledging it can be powerful. Try to validate the person's feelings and don't minimize what they are going through. Even if it doesn't seem like a lot to you, it might feel unbearable for them. Let them know help is available. Anyone who is struggling with thoughts of suicide can reach out to various supports such as calling Talk Suicide for advice and support 24 hours a day. Encourage the person you are worried about to reach out or to seek support elsewhere. Resources will be shared at the end of this presentation. Please explore resources to find distress lines in your community. If you think they might harm themselves imminently, please call 911 right away or encourage them to go to their nearest emergency department. Helpers can also reach out to these supports for guidance regarding navigating the mental health system. Many people don't know you can call a crisis line when there isn't a current crisis, but can get information on how to handle a potential crisis in advance. Let them know they deserve support. Feeling like you are not deserving of help can be a big barrier to reaching out. Let the person know not only that help is available, but also that they deserve to feel supported in whatever they are facing. Use inclusive, safe language. Words are important when it comes to talking about suicide, and while talking can make a big difference, there are things you should avoid saying. To consider what safe language is, it can be helpful to review words and phrases to use as suggested in the 988.ca Safe Language Guide. To guide use of safe language regarding suicide, consider these recommended phrases as safe to use. Are you doing okay? I've noticed you haven't been yourself lately. I'm worried about you. I care about you and I want to help. What are you feeling? Are you having thoughts of ending your life? Are you thinking about suicide? You deserve help. As well as, it is very safe and helpful to express to someone, you are not alone. I'm here to listen. Tell me more about that. Whatever you tell me, I won't judge you. That's a lot to carry. It seems like you're going through a lot. I hear you. I see that you're in a lot of pain. It is important to note that language matters when talking safely about suicide because sometimes the words we use can be stigmatizing, even if we don't mean them to be. Language does matter. By choosing our words carefully, we can help break down the shame and stigma that surround suicide and encourage people to get the help when they need it. When you are talking or writing about suicide, it is important to keep it clear, factual, and neutral. There are a few suggestions as to what to and not to say. Let's review some of the language regarding suicide and consider some recommendations for what not to say when talking about suicide and the more acceptable phrases and expressions. We ought to refrain from saying commit suicide or committed suicide. Why not? This phrase comes from a time in the past when suicide was considered a crime. Using this language promotes the idea that people who attempt or die by suicide have done something wrong. Many religions consider suicide to be a sin, adding shame and/or stigma, and may result in hesitancy to talk about suicidal thoughts in some communities. Instead say, suicide, died by suicide, took their own life, or ended their life. We ought to refrain from saying failed attempt, failed suicide, unsuccessful attempt, unsuccessful suicide, or incomplete suicide. Why not? These terms suggest that dying by suicide is succeeding, when in fact every death by suicide is a tragedy. It is best to instead say attempted suicide, or survived a suicide attempt, or had a suicide behavior. We ought to refrain from saying completed attempt or completed suicide. Why not? As noted prior, avoid any language that suggests dying by suicide is a success. It is preferable to say instead died by suicide or death by suicide or suicide. We ought to refrain from saying at-risk people, populations, or high-risk people, populations. Why not? These phrases imply that it is inevitable that people from particular groups such as elderly people, people with low incomes, homeless people, racial or ethnic minorities, people in prison, or people in the LGBTQ+ community will experience suicidality. Someone's identity or background does not put them at risk of suicide, but how they are treated by others can be a contributing factor. Instead, we ought to say populations with a potentially high risk of suicide, populations with higher rates of suicide, or factors that may increase someone's risk of suicide. Another way you can avoid adding to the stigma around suicide is by using people-first language. This respects people's identities and experiences rather than labeling or categorizing them. We ought to refrain from saying suicide victim. We ought to instead say he, she, or they died by suicide. We also ought to refrain from saying suicidal and instead say feeling suicidal, having or experiencing suicidal thoughts or feelings, or thinking about suicide. Having reviewed best communication practices, let us continue to debunk a few more myths. Another unhelpful myth is that suicide is a sign of weakness. Suicide is not a moral weakness or a character flaw. It is not selfish or a cry for attention. These ideas are all a part of the stigma that surrounds suicide. Stigma can cause someone who is thinking about suicide to believe that their feelings are something to be ashamed of. This is dangerous and can stop people from seeking help. This is why it's so important to talk about suicide, so we can break down the shame and stigma that surrounds it. People considering suicide only want to end their life is another unhelpful myth. Most people who attempt suicide don't necessarily want to die, but they do want to end their emotional pain. They may be overcome with hopelessness and unable to see another way out of their situation. They may have lost their sense of connection to the people around them. However, thoughts of suicide can pass, and people who have thought about or attempted suicide in the past can go on to live full and rich lives when they receive the support they need. The idea that everyone who dies by suicide leaves a note is the final common myth we will explore in this presentation. According to suicidology studies, less than a third, or from 12% to 30% of suicidal people do leave a note. It is therefore safe to say that the majority do not undertake to write down their last words. Before reviewing risk and protective factors for suicide, please note that protective factors can be circumstances which help or protect us, like good mental and physical health, and risk factors are circumstances which can challenge or add to our vulnerability to harms, such as poor health or poverty. Preventing suicide. When someone dies by suicide, it is usually because of multiple factors. To prevent suicide, we need to look beyond the individual and consider what is happening around them, in their community, in their relationships, and in wider society. Some groups and communities have unique risk factors when it comes to suicide, and there are unique ways that they can be protected from suicide. But it's important to remember that coming from a community that is considered to be high risk does not mean that suicide is inevitable. Suicide affects everyone from all walks of life. Consider risk and protective factors at different levels of life, starting with the individual to the social levels as per Canada's Talk Suicide or 988.ca. While an individual's protective factors can include coping and problem-solving skills, hope, good mental and physical health, as well as their resilience, risk factors might include previous suicide attempts, male gender, mental illness, depression, problems with impulsivity or aggression, substance use, serious illness, stressors such as job or relationship loss, financial stress, as well as legal or criminal problems. In terms of one's interactions with others, protective factors can result from things like protective childhood experiences such as safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments which have the power to prevent or protect children from traumatic events, toxic stress, or adverse childhood experiences. These positive experiences can happen both in and outside the home. We may be further protected by social supports as well as connectedness with family and friends by experiencing family mental well-being. Relational risk factors may include things like social isolation, adverse childhood experiences such as abuse or neglect, bullying, family history of suicide, or mental illness within a family. In community, one may gain protective factors by way of access to trauma-informed care in health settings, schools, and other institutions, as well as spiritual and cultural beliefs that discourage suicide. Alternatively, risk factors may increase with suicide clusters in communities, barriers in accessing healthcare, and also when a community holds spiritual or cultural beliefs that suicide is heroic. In relation to one's society or its organization, policy, and programs that prevent suicide, such as national suicide prevention strategies, are protective factors, while risk factors include easy social access to lethal means, unemployment and poverty, poor social determinants of health, stigma, and feeling unsafe. Following this brief introduction to understanding a little more about suicide and suicide prevention, please know there are many helpful resources and that help is available, beginning with our National Suicide Crisis Line, freely accessible 24/7 by calling 988 and online at 988.ca. Help and support is available immediately for anyone having thoughts of suicide, as well as for their loved ones or anyone who may be impacted. The Manitoba Suicide Prevention and Support Line is our province's toll-free, confidential, 24-hour crisis line run by trained crisis counselors from Clinic Community Health, an accredited crisis center available 24/7. Call 1-877-435-7170 or visit reasontolive.ca. The Hope for Wellness helpline number 1-855-242-3310 and website hopeforwellness.ca offers immediate help to all Indigenous peoples across Canada 24/7, chat by phone or online. In addition to resources for individuals, there are supports for families. Peer Connections Manitoba at peerconnectionsmb.ca offers family peer support. The Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention Canada, CASP, has a full-service support directory as well as suicide prevention training and support. The Mental Health Commission of Canada provides supportive suicide prevention programs and information. The Centers for Suicide Prevention, suicideinfo.ca, as well as 988, offer suicide crisis help and support by calling or texting 988 or visiting Talk Suicide or reasontolive.ca. Please also know of and take note of these immediately accessible crisis services. The KHP or Kids Help Phone e-mental health services are available for kids 24/7 across Canada, online, by phone at 1-800-668-6868 or by text at 686868. Clinic crisis and sexual assault lines are also available 24/7 online at clinic.mb.ca or toll-free at 1-888-322-3019. The National Residential School Crisis Line provides support to former students, is a 24-hour crisis line accessed at 1-866-925-4419. The Manitoba Addictions Helpline provides central addiction services online at mbaddictionhelp.ca by calling or texting 1-855-662-6605. The Manitoba Farm, Rural, and Northern Support Services provides telephone and online counseling to farmers, rural and northern Manitobans, as well as education, training, and monthly suicide bereavement support groups. The MFRNSS provides mental health resources related to rural, northern, Indigenous, and agricultural mental health. Access to the Manitoba Farm, Rural, and Northern Support Services by calling 1-866-367-3276 or visit online at supportline.ca. We hope that the information provided in this presentation is helpful to you, and thank you for your interest.